So today we're gonna talk about what's going on with BioWare, because it's kind of a discussion about the entire industry. Honestly, at this point, if you've been paying attention to what's going on in the gaming, or really just the tech industries, there's layoffs all over, despite record amounts of income. It's weird, but not that surprising. And specifically, we're going to go into BioWare. So there's kind of two main stories I want to talk about, and kind of briefly summarize. Then I want to give my take on it, because I think my take is maybe a little more nuanced than some of the other ones I've seen, and kind of give my commentary on how it seems like fans and the industry is reacting to these things. And then I want to talk about what I think kind of the future and what's going to come for BioWare, Dragon Age, Dreadwolf, and Mass Effect. So the two stories I want to talk about is something I've covered a decent amount, where a few weeks ago, maybe a month or two ago now, it was announced BioWare put out a blog, which at first was very exciting because we haven't heard from them in a while. And then it was very depressing because it was a blog about restructuring of their company and how they were laying off 50 people. Over the subsequent few days, we saw probably a majority of those people saying like, hey, I got laid off. If you're looking for someone who does what I do, let me know. As well as, kind of some like moderate pushback from fans and so on about these. But it was more focused on the fact that a lot of the people who were fired were like pretty long-term veterans at BioWare, people who had written on games that a lot of the fans really loved, even written specific characters that people loved and enjoyed. And then what happened in the last week or so, it was announced that a handful of those 50-ish people who were laid off have filed a lawsuit, basically to try to get a more, quote unquote, fair severance. They feel like they were kind of guilted into taking a lesser severance than what they felt like they deserved. And at least some of these people have decided that they think they should have gotten more. The second story that has come out is concerning the situation where the headline, I believe it was from maybe Polygon, was something along the lines of BioWare lays off all unionized QA workers on Dragon Age Dreadwolf, and that's the headline. And what actually happened is that BioWare had a contract with a third-party studio that's not associated with BioWare or EA. Their contract expired and they didn't renew it. Then that third-party studio, who primarily does QA on contract for other studios and publishers, essentially couldn't find work for those 13 or so QA workers to do, and they laid them off. And those workers were unionized over the summer. And so the headline of that story was, in my opinion, extremely misrepresentative, because and it was obviously just playing off the other story. So the thing about the layoffs, let's start with that, is that in some capacity, those layoffs are kind of normal. We're obviously in a moment right now where we're seeing studios shutting down. We're seeing publishers, cutting workers, even like Epic and, the Embracer Group and some of these giant publishing groups are, that, especially Epic, that should be making money and likely are cutting jobs. BioWare cutting jobs isn't necessarily always going to be directly related to EA making or losing money. I think there's, it's even what I said is, EA made $400 million last month or whatever that quote is. The thing with subsidiaries is they tend to have separate budgets and they tend to be held accountable as individual businesses underneath the parent business, right? I'm not defending it. It's awful, but it's what happens. Now with BioWare specifically, it's interesting because they have to be pretty bad in the red at this point. I have to imagine it. Pure speculation. They did have the Mass Effect Legendary Edition come out a couple years ago, and that probably sold pretty well and probably didn't cost them that much money to make, I think is probably a fair guess. But you have to consider that before that they had Anthem, and before that they had Andromeda, and a while before that they had Inquisition. And the Legendary Edition probably made okay money, or maybe even good money. Anthem, I don't know if we ever got word on this, but I imagine that at best they broke even. They probably lost money on Anthem. Supposedly Andromeda actually sold a lot better than a lot of people would imagine, and I would imagine that at the very least it probably broke even and maybe even made some money. And then Inquisition, I think did fairly well, and I'm not under the impression that was a big financial failure from what I've seen. But then you look at today, and it's been 4 or 5 years since they've put anything out. Dragon Age Dreadwolf has been there, and the problem with Dreadwolf is that it's been just sucking up money for 5-6 years. We know that they've rebooted the game a few times, and so you look at it and you say, well, lots of games are in development for this long. But what you find about Dragon Age is that it's probably in some capacity restarted development multiple times at this point. And that costs a lot of money, especially when you're not putting out other projects. It's not like they put out a new Mass Effect game recently. The Legendary Edition, again, probably helped them, but was probably not the same as releasing like a brand new game and getting those kind of sales, right? And so while they're spending all this money, I imagine EA looked at them and just said, hey, you guys got to cut something, and then it's up to you to who you cut. And the people they cut were probably some of their higher earners, and because they were their veteran workers, and especially to the community, and I'm sure to BioWare as well, they were really valuable. We also don't know a lot about how the severances worked and all of that. We don't know if what those workers got was reasonable. I've seen a lot of people quoting the attorney that they're working with and saying some of their kind of colorful language in their quotes. You need to realize that it's a lawyer's job to sensationalize and exaggerate and stay within the truth, and not lie, obviously, but to, especially in this situation, make a big hubbub, because one, if EA and BioWare catch enough flack, they're probably just going to settle and give these individuals basically what they want, which is what I think is going to happen. And it's what I think the play here is, and that's totally fair. The attorney for these people who are suing also knows that EA and BioWare are almost certainly not going to say anything publicly. There may even be some legalities to it. I'm not an attorney, especially not in Canada. I don't know how everything works. I have to imagine that in some capacity with pending litigation, the standard thing for corporations to do is to not say anything until it's all buttoned up, until there's a resolution. And I think that what's going to happen with these, handful of individuals from BioWare that got laid off and are now asking for more severance is they're going to get probably almost exactly what they wanted. I'm sure there'll be some negotiation, but I know if this was happening in the States, there would be almost a zero chance this would go to court, because it's essentially a play to get what they felt like they deserved in the first place, which again, awesome. I hope they do. The other part of this that is interesting, where that story feels very legitimate and feels very reasonable, and people being upset about that, totally cool. Well, then you have this other story come up that I talked about where these people got laid off. I think it was 13 people from this third-party indie studio. What happened in this situation where there's this headline that says BioWare lays off all unionized QA workers on Dragon Age Dreadwolf, but then you actually read the story, and what really happened was there's a QA studio that had a contract with BioWare to QA Dragon Age Dreadwolf, which is in late development. We've all pretty much assumed that contract ended. That third-party studio didn't find a new contract for those workers to work on, and they fired them. They laid them off. Now, there's multiple bits of nuance here. Those workers had just unionized over the summer, And so maybe that third party QA studio had motivation to not find new contracts for them, to not find new work for them, and then lay them off. I've seen multiple people say that isn't it illegal to lay off unionized workers? I have no idea. I especially have no idea how things work up in Canada. I'm going to stay out of that. The other nuance is that the whole reason BioWare is contracting out QA is its own shadiness. Is they could hire their own QA, they could have their own internal QA, they could be unionized, and the fact that BioWare is using this third party in the first place is shady enough. And then if that contract, to renew it was going to be more expensive because the workers are now unionized, and that's why BioWare didn't renew. Like, that's maybe not a great look, but you also can't blame a company for not renewing a contract that is more expensive than what they want to pay, even though they should be able to pay it. So you go down the rabbit hole there. But I guess what bothered me about, and what in the conversation you're seeing right now, is people took the second story, didn't just read the headline, which was really inappropriate because it's not accurate. It's piggybacking off of this legitimate situation, or more reasonable situation that is more clearly problematic, with the layoffs, which is normal but still sucks, especially towards the end of a game's development. But then especially this lawsuit that's come, where these workers are alleging that they have basically been disrespected and not treated very well, which sucks. And now you have the second story piggybacking off of that, and doing it very purposefully, right? Because the actual story is like a little, it's like, it's interesting, but maybe it's not like a big sensational problem. But that with that title, it is, because no one reads the article and they just get mad, which is what's happened. If you've paid attention to social media and stuff like that, you'll see that there's people being like, I can't believe BioWare fired unionized workers, where that's not what happened. It's patently false, in fact. And that's led to the community being very negative, very pessimistic, very toxic, very, reactionary and things like that, which, like I said at the beginning, is fine, but it's maybe a little misplaced. And I guess what I'm offering here is an acknowledgement that stuff sucks. And if you're mad about it, that's perfectly reasonable. But if you're wanting to try to glean some kind of, not maybe silver lining, I guess, out of it, there's a discussion to have about how things move forward, right? More than anything, for the fans and for BioWare needs to get Dragon Age Dreadwolf out. they need conversation about BioWare that isn't about layoffs, that isn't about repeated internal game delays, that isn't about Andromeda, that isn't about Anthem, that isn't about rebooting Dreadwolf multiple times, that isn't about how BioWare used to be good and now it isn't. About, BioWare just needs a conversation about something productive that they've done. The Legendary Edition, I think, mended some of those wounds and did that for a short time, but that was just a remaster of a trilogy that was already good, right? And so more than anything, like, I hope that Dreadwolf is coming out in early 2024. The rumors are like spring, summer. It needs to be as soon as possible, in my opinion, even if it's just to get the conversation moving forward in some capacity. And that's likely. I think the layoffs of those 50 people are probably somewhat indicative that they are getting towards the end of development, because a lot of that staff were writers and stuff like that, people who probably haven't been really actively working on the game in a while, and who are probably preparing to move over to Mass Effect. The QA workers not having their contract renewed, maybe it was because they were too expensive. It could have also been because maybe they have a lesser need for QA at this point. Maybe they're getting to a point in the development that they don't need that outside QA anymore, or they didn't need to renew it, or maybe it was because they're greedy bastards. I don't know. And that's kind of the short-term future of Dragon Age, right? Like, Dreadwolf's going to come out next year probably, and the thing is it doesn't have to be a 10 out of 10. It needs to be at least like a 7.5 or an 8 out of 10 for like most people. And a lot of this conversation goes away. Look at how CDPR, CD Projekt Red, is being talked about right now, despite the disaster from a bug perspective that Cyberpunk was when it came out. How even from a mechanic and gameplay perspective, it was a huge letdown. How even today with Cyberpunk 2.0, at least in my opinion, it's still a pretty wide but shallow game. That's basically Call of Duty in an open world, in my opinion. But it's had like a renaissance because they put stuff out and they fix things. And they straight up, they lied. And even recently, they've basically gaslit everyone into why things, they've said that the game was actually in pretty good shape when it came out, that people just got, too upset, or internet people, blah, 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 and have basically just lied about what was really going on, and even goes on today. But they've been able to recover their image a lot since then, because they just kind of put their head down and put stuff out. And that's what BioWare can do with Dreadwolf. Now with Mass Effect, that's kind of it's an interesting story. I feel like most people believe that Dreadwolf is coming. Like that's gonna come out. I've seen a lot of people say that they think that that's like the final straw for BioWare, though. I don't. I think EA, I hope, is smart enough to realize that even if Dreadwolf is good, it's going to struggle to make money. It's going to have to sell a lot of copies to pay for its development, and then to make money after that, because there's going to be marketing costs and stuff too. And so with Mass Effect, I actually think that's the make or break game. I think that's the game where EA is going to want BioWare to show we can efficiently and effectively make a game that will sell pretty well and that people are going to like pretty much. And that's why when you've seen these rumors about it may drop open world and go to a more, hub and mission style game like the trilogy was, where they're moving from Frostbite to Unreal Engine 5, where they're currently hiring, despite BioWare having layoffs recently, they're hiring at least one position, and BioWare as a whole is hiring 3 or 4. They wouldn't be doing that if they were shutting things down right now, probably. And so I think Mass Effect is going to come out. I think it's going to be a while, but maybe not as long as people think, especially if it's going to be a smaller experience. I don't think it's going to be a Dragon Age Dreadwolf. I think Dreadwolf is going to be gigantic. I think it's going to be unreasonably large because I think it's going to have a crazy high scope. And then I think Mass Effect's going to have a pretty medium or even a small scope in comparison. And so I think Mass Effect's going to come out. I think we're going to have N7 Day in about a month and have a lot of fun with it. I think that BioWare has a really good chance to put their head down. They need to settle with those people who are suing them. They need to get some good, headlines out by putting out a game and having a fun N7 Day celebration, and, getting some real information about Dreadwolf out. And people, gamers have short memories, man. And they shouldn't, but they do. And again, like I said, CDPR, they can probably use them as an example of a dev who hurt their reputation a lot, who caught a lot of flack, and then just did stuff to make it better. And that's kind of what I think we're gonna have to see BioWare do. So if you're still here after almost 25 minutes of me ranting, I really appreciate it. I'm not trying to be an apologist or anything. I think a lot of what EA and BioWare are doing is pretty scummy and pretty, they're really shooting themselves in the foot, and it's really frustrating, especially from a fan perspective of, someone who just wants to see them make games and put them out. It's not just EA and BioWare. The whole industry is on fire right now. Oddly enough, in a year where we're arguably getting the best slate of games ever, in a year of video games. And so it's been a quite an interesting environment to be covering all of this stuff in. Everything's falling apart while we're also getting amazing results. And so I think that we may be quietly seeing the industry shifting into a new evolution of itself, but we may not really know what that looks like for another couple years. So Thank you for listening. I am now a YouTube partner. If you want to join as a member and support this content, the more members and the more support I have, the more time I can justify to doing this stuff, including live streams here and over on Twitch, including my podcast, including interviews and more videos and all of that stuff. So check out the hit the join button here on the page if you would like. You can also check me out over on Patreon. You can check me out on Twitter and Threads and Instagram and Twitch. You can hit all of those places in the Linktree link down in the description or down in the pinned comment. If you like this video, please subscribe to the channel. If you liked it, please like with the little like button down there. Comment with your thoughts, your questions, or just your opinions in general. You can tell me I'm a big dummy. And that's all I have for this one. So until next time.